Well, good morning and welcome everyone. My name is Sherry Hildred. I'm going to be facilitating today's webinar on project compliance, professional micro-credential in the area of contract management for performance. Before we get started, folks, just want to take a moment to acknowledge the University of Regina is situated on the territories of the Cree, the Saulteaux, the Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota, and the homeland of the Métis and Michif Nation. The University of Regina is on Treaty 4 lands, and we actually also have a presence in Treaty 6 as well. So again, good morning and welcome, folks, to this webinar on our very brand new and exciting project, Microcredentials, being offered through the Center for Continuing Education. Now, before we get into the content of the webinar itself, just a few logistics I wanted to cover with you. By way of sort of format, this is going to be about a 40 to 45 minute presentation. This session is being recorded. However, when we move into the last 15 minutes or so of the presentation, our Q&A session will not be recorded. So the session itself is being recorded now for the next 45 minutes. And as I say, we'll move into a question and answer period at the end of the session. Very fortunate today to have Emma with me. Emma is from Student Instructor Services, and she will be compiling any questions that you may have through the course of the webinar. So you're certainly welcome to put those into the chat. Emma's going to compile them for me just to make sure I don't miss anything. Share it with me at the end, and we'll make sure that any of your questions that you have are answered before the end of the session today. As mentioned, with this session being recorded, it will be made available about 24 hours after the session ends today. So again, if you wanted to go back and revisit the webinar, you're certainly more than welcome to do so. The slide deck for this presentation is not being provided in advance. So I just wanted to invite folks, feel free to make notes, record any questions that you might have throughout the webinar. And again, happy to answer any of those questions once we get through to the end of the material. Again, for today, we're going to be looking at the project compliance professional micro-credential with a focus in on contract management for performance. I'm also going to be speaking to the few other aspects that make up the project compliance professional micro-credential. So as we're going through navigating this new offering through the Center for Continuing Education, I also just wanted to flag early on, you'll see in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, we have some contact information for our fantastic student and instructor services team. So again, any questions that you might have around registration or programming, we're just asking that all of those inquiries be directed to our SIS staff. I certainly have included and absolutely invite you to send me an email if you do have any questions on the overall course content or anything sort of related to the field of project management. So as we go through and navigate some of these areas related to project compliance, you may have other questions in the field of project management or the designations in the field that we'll touch on today. So you're certainly welcome to reach out to me, and I invite you to send me an email offline if you like for any of those other questions. But as I say, for anything specifically related to programming and registration, ask that we route those through to our SIS staff. So with that, folks, just want to give a bit of an overview on the seminar references that I've considered in the development of both this webinar as well as the actual curriculum for the professional micro-credential in the area of project compliance. So again, you'll see a number of seminar references that are noted here, and there are some others that I certainly will reference as we go through the material and the content today. Now, one of those other primary references that I do want to make note of is the Guide to Project Management Book of Knowledge. So the acronym for this seminar reference is PMBOK. Again, a guide to the Project Management Book of Knowledge, or otherwise referred to as PMBOK. PMBOK is published and issued by the Project Management Institute. So this is an entity that's existed since 1969. They author and publish international standard around project management. In the development of the seminar webinar today, as well as the curriculum for this professional micro-credential, I have relied on information contained within PMBOK. So both the 6th edition, which was published about 4 years ago, and the brand new edition, the 7th edition that just came out in about the last month here. So I will be using information from both resources. And really what we see Project Management Institute doing is setting an international standard for project management. So there are a number of components that are considered. I will talk briefly about designation in the field of project management, and then more specifically around the foundational building blocks that establish this framework that we build out project compliance. So again, there's some basic fundamental information around project management, various phases and knowledge areas that we consider in project management, and then very specifically, we hone in on aspects of cost procurement that support contract management for performance. So again, the idea with PMBOK is that we have something called a triple constraint, which is represented by the triangle that you see with scope, schedule, budget, and quality. So the idea that we have a triple constraint of project, or constraints of our project that we need to manage, and that we have a framework with basic fundamental technology methodologies that we utilize within project management that are supported by various inputs, tools and techniques, and outputs. So again, as we're going through and looking at this Project Management Institute, or PMI, methodology, we'll consider these major foundational building blocks and then how they support this very specific area of project compliance, particularly related to cost procurement and contract management. So again, we have a bit of a framework that's provided to us by PMBOK, but first I really want to examine why project compliance is so important. So on the following slide, you'll see a little bit of statistical information. About every 4 years, Project Management Institute conducts a very extensive global survey. They do annual surveys, and about every 4 years, they conduct a fairly extensive global survey through its approximately 500,000 members. We have about 200 countries that have Project Management Institute chapters. Again, in Saskatchewan, we have 2 PMI chapters, PMI North and Regina South Sask. So again, through all of this good work and gathering information within the Project Management Institute itself, they generate some really interesting statistical information that not only helps inform future iterations of PMBOK, but also really for the purposes of this webinar, really shines the light on the importance of project compliance. So if we have a look at some of these stats, for example, when we're looking at the idea of scope creep, or that the work of the project is creeping outside of the constraints that we originally set for it, 52% of completed projects are reporting that they experience a high degree of scope creep. Why are projects failing? Change in organizational priorities, an inability to hit those budget targets, impact to organizational budget when projects fail. And in addition to these few pieces of statistical information, another really staggering statistic from the Project Management Institute, 87% of the time when a project fails, some aspect of that failure is attributed to communication. So where have we had communication breakdown? So certainly through that contractual lens, when we look at those relationships with vendors, having really effective contractual arrangements or relationships with vendors, where can we improve communication? So there's a number of areas that we want to examine, and all of them really support the importance of project compliance. A few other pieces of information, overarching information, when we talk about project execution, what are the things that are really impacting organizations today? So, for example, the idea of economic downturn, where we have impacts to organizations from exterior pressures, changes in sectors and industries, the intent of trying to execute project when we're trying to perhaps do more with less, or being expected to do more with the same amount of resources. So again, you can see with some of the recent survey out of Standish Group, the Chaos Study, 53% of projects experienced some type of challenge. So they were completed, but they were late, they were over budget, or perhaps they didn't have the acceptance criteria, the level of quality, or actually deliver the scope that was set out from the start of the project. 16% of projects completely successful and 31% of projects canceled. So this means we're moving through a project and for some reason, we've had a barrier that just has killed the project. So the projects are actually canceled. So as we consider where we have these challenges, when we talk about project compliance, project execution, we start to see some really emerging contemporary trends around what can we do to really offset some of those impacts. So whether that's investment in different capacity building, leadership, emphasis on human resource practices, looking at new technologies, data management. So again, there's a number of different key temporary considerations, and certainly the inception of these new professional micro-credentials through Center for Continuing Education is a real sort of response to that. And we'll talk about what the university has done to really assess the industry, the marketplace, where the skills gaps, and then how did the micro-credential programs come into play. So again, for many organizations, you know, the struggle is real. The idea that we are stretched thin, we maybe haven't defined what is a project, something that's going to start, something that's going to end. We have additional requirements creep into the work that we're trying to execute. We're trying to do all of this with limited resources. So I always find it interesting, folks, sort of gathered over the course of time through my experience working on projects, working with different organizations, different myths and quotes that tend to come up. This idea that project delivery is unpredictable. So certainly when we're looking at project compliance, it's about removing that unpredictability. How can we create a project plan that really is going to allow us to deliver? The idea of management giving unreasonable deadlines. So this idea of schedule or time constraint of our projects, and how can we ensure that we really are being realistic about what we can accomplish with the timeline that we have. And equally so, if we are trying to do or allowing scope creep and trying to do more than what is reasonable, where do we have potential quality impacts or risk exposures? And we'll talk about that a little bit more as we get into some of the additional material around the project compliance professional micro-credential. The idea that, you know, my project is just a little bit different. I don't need that level of planning. So again, it is very much the position of the Project Management Institute and the project management methodology that every project is unique. So even if we're doing a similar project of a similar nature, we are going to have project compliance failures if we're not considering each project individually and realizing that it is a unique project and it has very specific and unique requirements. And again, all of this methodology really supports us allowing to look at, yes, where can we use our lessons learned from previous similar projects, but that every project really is unique and does require a very specific degree of planning to ensure project compliance. And then, of course, one of my favorite, are you still planning? When are we going to get some real work done? So very often, one of the challenges for project managers is making that business case or making that argument that the investment in project management planning is just that. It's an investment. And the idea is, of course, that if we're making that investment in the project plan, we're positioning ourselves far better to be able to execute a project plan and execute once with a limited rework or scrapping of work and having to redo work, and in essence really challenging our ability to be compliant with our project and finish on time, on budget, and certainly within the scope that's been determined. So this is really what we see as some of those foundational pieces around project compliance. As for the project manager and their role to this, so what do they do? There's certainly many attributes of a project manager that cross the lines of both being a manager and being a leader. So leading the project team, but also carrying out that very important work around planning, organizing resources, managing a budget, controlling various aspects of the project, including our cost procurement and our contractual considerations with various initiatives. So again, when we look at the role of the project manager and what they do, it is quite expansive. From a professional practice standpoint, what I can tell you, there's certainly growing momentum. We saw in the previous slide about 68% of organizations are looking to outsource their project management requirements. So again, really looking to tap into those specialized resources that have the professional training in the field of project management. Right now, what we hear PMI reporting is that project managers that are designated in the field of project management, and we'll look at these certifications and designations briefly. There's two that I want to examine today. What we're hearing from Project Management Institute is that those project managers that hold a designation in the field are generally earning about 26% more than their non-designated counterparts. So again, we're really seeing increased momentum, awareness, and appetite by organizations to really tap into professional project management services. So from a very broad sort of career standpoint or professional practice standpoint, more emphasis on individuals that can support the execution of project that can ensure in a very professional way project compliance. So as we move into considering project compliance, there are a couple of sort of cornerstone or foundational building blocks that I wanted to briefly cover. One of them is referred to as the Standard of Project Management, which is presented to us in the 6th edition of PMBOK in the manner that you see here through the delivery of 5 process groups. As we move into the 7th edition of PMBOK, we're seeing a little bit of a change in the approach to some of this methodology, but in essence, the core components are still the same. The idea that we are going to move through phases of a project or the entire project start to finish through the initiating, planning, executing, and closing phases or process groups, if you will, and that we monitor and control the project throughout. So that standard of project management, even though it's represented slightly different in the 6th and 7th editions, really does cover those main areas of focus where we're defining the objectives of the project, we're receiving authorization based on the resources that we've identified that are required, adequate resources for project compliance, and then how do we carry out that plan, monitoring and controlling through the entire project life cycle. So this represents one of those foundational cornerstones or building blocks of project compliance. The second component that's very critical is the component parts of those process groups. So for each one of those process groups, we have a number of component parts that are represented by the acronym ITTOs. And your ITTOs simply are your inputs, your tools and techniques that you're going to utilize as a project manager, and then what you're going to generate for project management planning or creating that pathway through to project compliance. I've given you a small example here. This is an excerpt of the typical process description in the creation of a project charter. So I've just selected a very simple process description to sort of demonstrate, well, here are the inputs that a project manager would use. In the case of a project charter, we need to refer to a statement of work. What is the business trigger? What's the reason for the project? What's the business case, if you will? Any agreements that may exist, and then what's going on in our enterprise, our industry, our sector, those enterprise environmental factors, as well as our organizational process assets, which really are the guidelines, the standards, the regulations, policies, processes internally within an organization that we have to adhere to. So we utilize our expert judgment, professional training, and expertise to generate something that will be a project charter. So again, this is just a very simple example of how the ITTOs are demonstrated within PMBOK. And this is really where we do start when we talk about project compliance. Now, the third component that we see within the core framework of PMBOK methodology or project compliance methodology is the idea of knowledge areas. So there are 10 knowledge areas within PMBOK. The first is referred to as integration management. And the role of integration management is really to make sure that the 9 other functional areas of management on a project are working and working well together. So as we go through and look at the knowledge areas the way they're defined here, I've bolded the ones that really have the closest or tightest link to this particular professional micro-credential when we talk about project compliance. There is also a very close relationship between knowledge areas. So for example, when we look at cost management and procurement management, there's a very natural relationship that exists between building our cost budget for a project and considering our procurement requirements or our resourcing that we need to tap into that's outside of our organization. The same is true with quality management and risk management. So the idea that we're establishing acceptance criteria for our project, we have quality targets, but every project also inherently brings a degree of uncertainty. So where we have uncertainty or risk, do we potentially have an impact to the quality or to the acceptance criteria of the project? So again, there's a relationship between quality and risk. So when we look at those 4 particular knowledge areas, they really start to form the basis of some core focus when we talk about project compliance, and really how we started building out the professional micro-credential around project compliance. And again, today we're going to look at the micro-credential, generally what is it? Then we'll look at contract management for performance, as well as I do want to touch point on the other 2 components that make up this professional micro-credential. So looking at micro-credentials, folks, I just wanted to give a bit of background here. This is a very new, exciting offering by the University of Regina. There was much work that went into researching, planning, working with industry, government, looking at where we have potential gaps in learning or skill sets and what can we offer to address those gaps. So what are the needs of students based on what are the needs that we're hearing from employers across the province? And thus, the idea of the professional micro-credential evolved. So with brand new programming and brand new credentialing. So very excited to share these course offerings with you. Now, how the micro-credentials work, simply that we have a number of areas of skill set that have been identified and looked at collectively in a way where a micro-credential can be developed. So in this case, the project compliance micro-credential, and that it is built or established with a series of badges. So there are 3 badges that make up the micro-credential. Again, I will look at the contract management for performance badge, but we'll also look at the other 2 that make up the project compliance micro-credential. So again, with these micro-credentials and with the badges themselves, they are all recognizable industry standard training, recognized by employers. And they also come with recognition through the university. So you can use that digital recognition, for example, in your resumes, your LinkedIn profile, for example, to really demonstrate these aspects of learning or skills development that you've engaged in. So again, that's just some broad information on the professional micro-credential itself. Short, verifiable segments of very specific learning that collectively can be stacked through stackable badges to support an overall micro-credential. Who are they for? So again, for individuals that are looking to upskill, to maybe rebuild some skills or build net new skills, build additional capacity in a specific area. So that could be students that are wanting to do some supplementary learning as they're carrying out their ongoing education. Certainly job seekers who are maybe looking at their area of work in project management and saying, well, I've got, good work in assisting or supporting or coordinating project, or maybe leading aspects of project, but maybe I haven't done a whole lot in contract management. So I want to look at that badge, or I haven't done a whole lot in quality or risk management. So again, the idea that we can really specifically target those areas of interest for job seekers who maybe feel that they have a bit of a gap or they want to fill that skill gap. Equally so with business and industry partners that are looking to upskill or reskill some of their employees. Certainly the micro-credential program is ideally suited for them. And again, folks, any of the registration programming inquiries, just a reminder that we do have our folks within our student and instructor services. So again, asking that all of the inquiries related to the programming actually be delivered and directed to our folks over at SIS. Again, we will have opportunity to answer some of those questions at the end of the webinar today, but for all general program and registration inquiries, again, the contact information is provided to you. So as we move into the different types of micro-credentials in this brand new exciting offering, as I say, the one I'm going to focus in on today will be project compliance. So looking at the various aspects of project compliance with a very specific focus on the contract management for performance. So with project compliance, folks, this really is a deeper dive into contract management, risk identification, and quality management methodologies and techniques to really improve project compliance or project performance throughout its entire life cycle. So that's the broad sort of aspect or approach to that particular micro-credential related to project compliance. And as you can see, the university has 3 professional micro-credentials and more to come in the winter of 2022. So by way of overview, just looking at the comparatives, for folks that are interested in, well, how is there a difference between, a badge and a professional micro-credential and a professional certificate? So just wanted to share a little bit of information so you can see how each of these learning mechanisms work. So again, with our badges, again, typically very, very shortened, bite-sized training components. For every badge, we will have 3 classes, and those classes will have 3 hours of synchro or in-person time in the classroom virtually. And then there will be some asynchronistic time that's required for additional learning components. So it varies, but typically around 14 hours or less for each of the badges. And as you can see, you can do an individual standalone badge for a very specific skill set, or you could take all 3 badges within a professional micro-credential, and you do have up to 2 years to complete all 3 badges to achieve that micro-credential. A little bit different than our professional certificate. So if we look at the project management certificate program, there are 7 courses that will span typically several months and upwards to a maximum of 3 years for individuals to achieve their certificate in project management. So again, the micro-credential within project compliance is just a really excellent way to get at some of those skill sets or those gaps in skill sets, obtain very specific learning, and still endeavor to, if you chose, to complete an entire professional micro-credential. So it gives you just a little bit of a comparison for those that are interested. And again, we have the project compliance, 2 other micro-credentials at this time, and more to come in the winter of 2022. Now, with the project compliance professional micro-credential, as I say, we have 3 badges. Today, we're going to take a little bit of a deeper dive into the contract management for performance. I'm still going to touch point on risk and quality. And I just want to flag that each of these badges has been built for project compliance in a very consistent manner. So I want to give you a little bit of an outline of what each of those badges look like and how they build together to support the project compliance professional micro-credential and how the classes are structured. So for each of these particular badges, the framework or the format for the curriculum is very standardized. So what we have in each one of those classes is a component of lecture. So as I say, 3 classes with 3 hours each that we're in a virtual classroom together. So there is some component of lecture to sort of lay out the methodology, the approaches for a particular aspect of this particular professional micro-credential. So for example, with risk management, we're going to talk about some of the more contemporary considerations around risk management, and then we're going to move into application of that methodology. So that application comes in the form of group discussion, in-class work. Very often it will be looking at examining a video, for example, of a project that something went wrong and how could we address that with the methodologies that we've discussed. The knowledge checks will often also include things such as additional supplementary technical reading, additional videos. It could be different documentation excerpts from conference reports, other scenarios, project scenarios, or project case studies that we would examine to really reinforce the lecture or the methodology within the course content. And probably the most exciting, I think, with the micro-credentials and how the badges are built is that each and every one of the badges sends away participants with practical tools that you can immediately start applying on your projects. So let's say you maybe have a bit of a gap in in risk. You haven't done a whole lot of risk management on project. So when you're walking away from that particular badge, you will have actual tools, for example, a risk register and a heat map. You'll have some of those basic practical hands-on tools that you can immediately start applying to your projects. So again, I think that's one of the most exciting things about the way that the professional micro-credentials are built. It's not just the learning, the methodology, and some practical application. It's actual tools that you can start using on your projects immediately following a participation in the course. The other very exciting part about the badges is that they are eligible for project management training hours or recognized as formal training in the field of project management. This becomes very important for those individuals that are looking to perhaps gain certification or formal recognition designation in the field of project management. As I mentioned earlier, I wanted to touch on two of these designations. They're the two most popular designations in project management. The first is the Certified Associate in Project Management. The acronym is CAPM. So CAPM is the acronym for this entry-level designation. As you can see on the screen, I've included for you the basic requirements to apply to challenge the CAPM exam. As you can see, there is a requirement for 23 hours of recognized project management training. So again, the badges that make up each of the professional micro-credentials or that work and stand or serve as a standalone skill set training, those hours for those classes are recognized by the Project Management Institute if you are making application to write your CAPM exam. When you're looking at the next level of designation, the PMP designation, as you can see, I've included the requirements if you were to apply to write the exam. So again, the requirements vary depending on whether or not you are a degree holder or not. And you are required to have 35 hours of recognized project management training or your CAPM. So again, the badges do support that formal requirement for professional management training in the area of project management. And equally so, folks, for those of you that may already be or hold your PMP designation, as a PMP designate, you are required to earn 60 professional development units every 3 years to maintain your PMP designation. And again, these badges are eligible training for the purposes of reporting your professional development units to PDI, to PMI. So again, with the badges, they're not just standalone training, they're not just component parts or stackable as part of the micro-credential. They also do support the requirement for formal training hours, again, as a university as a registered education provider and recognized by the Project Management Institute. So again, for any folks that may have questions on the designations, I'm happy to answer those questions either at the end of the webinar or certainly offline. And as I say, really nice linkage between the badges and how they support the overall professional practice for those that are wanting and seeking out designation or recognition in the field. The other component part that I wanted to just briefly touch point on is in the lower right-hand corner, you'll see something that PMI refers to as their talent triangle, and that there are 3 components to that talent triangle: technical project management, strategic and business management, and leadership. And I just flag that for you because each and every one of the badges that have been built for the professional micro-credential around project compliance also align with PMI's talent triangle. So again, as a project manager designated as a PMP, not only do you have to have 30 PDUs every, or pardon me, 60 PDUs every 3 years, you have to balance your talent triangle. So that means you have to have a minimum of 8 PDUs in each side of that triangle. And again, with the badges and the way they've been built, they actually satisfy every side of that triangle. So every badge will deliver 50% of its time in the technical project management, 25% in strategic and business management, and 25% with a leadership focus. So we're making sure that all of the badges are supporting, not just endeavoring, to complete the project compliance professional micro-credential, but that we can have multiple purposes for the badges in supporting ongoing learning needs as well. So with that, folks, I want to move into the contract management for performance. So when we look at this badge within the project compliance professional micro-credential, what we're really doing is looking to boost participants' overall management understanding of contracts relative to project delivery. And we do this through looking at various components and processes of contracting. So that is a major component of what we're looking at. And how does contract management support organizations in achieving their project goals, but also their business goals? And what does that look like from a contract management standpoint, start to finish in the contract life cycle? So to do this, we first establish a foundation around cost management. So we look at cost management knowledge area, as well as aspects of procurement. So those aspects of PMBOK, with the idea that we want to start building our early on cost estimates, ultimately build a budget for our project, which we refer to as our project cost baseline. And then we're going to monitor and control and manage to that project cost baseline. Included in the project cost baseline are the costs for any items, skills, services, anything that we need to procure from outside of our organization, from outside of the project. And that's really where we get into the fundamentals of procurement management. So again, as we're going through the contract management for performance, we're looking at the contract life cycle itself from start to finish. What does that entail? Right from decision-making around whether or not to procure. Once we've made those decisions, what is the best vehicle to use in the project or within the organization to seek our resources from the vendor community. So for example, we can use a request for a proposal, an invitation for bid. There's different types of vehicles. So we need to make a decision on what is that vehicle that we're going to use. We need to test the vendor community where we are going to receive proposals. And then we're going to need to evaluate those proposals and ultimately land on selecting a preferred vendor. So those are some of the higher level pieces that we cover within the contract management. So as we're looking at the contract management life cycle, we also recognize that this involves development of contract. So the idea of contract management, what goes into a contract, understanding basic contract language, terminology, understanding the role of the project manager related to negotiation. So coming up with a mutually beneficial and agreeable contract between the buyer and the seller. To do this, we also look at various legal and ethical aspects or considerations around contract. And we look at the ability of an organization and a project to allocate or transfer some of its risk, some of its degree of uncertainty in the manner in which we build our contracts. So it's more than just testing the vendor community and developing a contract. It's thinking about risk allocation based on what we know our requirements are for the project and how solid our deliverables or objectives are or aren't. And where we have that degree of uncertainty, can we transfer some of that risk in our contracts? So again, this is a piece that we cover in the contract management for performance. And next, and very importantly, very rarely does a project execute exactly the way it was planned in the first instance. So there is a need for appropriate change management and having a system in place to not just ensure that we have agreed changes to the project, there's changes they're agreed to, but that we're also carrying that through to our contracts. So that could come in the form of contract addendums or amendments to contracts. So that gives you a bit of an overview of the contract management for performance, all the while making sure that we're really reinforcing the industry standards around terminology, definitions that project management practice uses, and particularly, as I say, understanding of basic contractual language as well. So that's an overview of the contract management for performance. I also wanted to flag that there are some really specific linkages between cost and procurement management relative to contract management and relative to the other two areas that we examine in project compliance. So again, when we look at the bigger picture, this idea of strategic considerations within an organization. So you may have a project, or you may have similar projects of a similar nature. We refer to that sometimes as a program, or if we have several programs or several projects, it may even be referred to as a portfolio. So when we're looking at contract management for performance, we also look at the strategic approach within an organization. So for example, if we are doing a number of projects of a similar nature, or we have a program comprised of similar projects, do we have an opportunity in our contractual engagements, for example, leveraging economies of scale, buying power, if you will, across the organization, instead of just looking at each project in its own individual silo? So again, there are some basic contract considerations that are more of a strategic nature. Of course, there's the basic contract management propositions that we look at. And then we also take a little bit of a deeper dive into setting the stage for this idea of embedding, planning, designing quality into our projects. And what is the cost of that quality? And how do we ensure that we're planning our projects in such a way and then capturing that degree of quality, those expectations, acceptance criteria, delivery requirements? How are we translating those into our contracts? So again, this is a bit of an exercise in looking for opportunities to mitigate risk exposures that we might see with our contracts. So is there an opportunity to get ahead of the curve and mitigate risks in advance? If a risk were to occur, what is our response to that risk? And do we have adequate provisions within our contracts relative to those potential risk exposures? So again, this is an exercise in going beyond the basics of contract management to also think about the needs and expectations of our stakeholders, including those vendors that we're working with, considering the broader parameters, of course, the scope of the project, the planning, the timing, the all-important timing, and most importantly, the overall resource plan. So when we're starting that work really early on with estimating the cost of our project, building out our project cost baseline, we're doing that based on our resource plan. And very often that resource plan does have significant procurement or contract management components. So you start to see where those linkages are and really how organizations can work to maximize benefits and really enhance business value through financial analysis, contract analysis, procurement analysis, and really look at the larger picture, not just those individual contracts. Now, as I mentioned earlier, folks, one of the things I'm most excited about with our badges, and in particular, the badge related to contract management for performance, is that you will walk away with tools that you can immediately start using on your projects. So again, if you are newer to project management, or if you are more seasoned and have more practical experience in leading and directing projects, these tools will be of use to you. Some of the tools that are included in this particular course offering, I've listed here on the screen for you. So a really fantastic Gantt chart that brings together the work breakdown structure. So the work breakdown structure is something that we talk about in project management that really decomposes our project into work packages and makes it possible to really deliver the various components of the project in a systematic and organized way. That's referred to as a work breakdown structure, or a WBS. One of the tools that I've included in this particular contract management for performance is a Gantt chart that brings together our work breakdown structure and our timeline for the project, or for every aspect of those work packages. So again, a really great tool you can immediately start using on your project. I've also included a project estimating calculation template. So again, as we're getting started very early on in the project and making those rough order of magnitude estimates, a really fantastic tool that does takes care of some of the work for us in calculating those estimates. So again, that's included in the toolkit. I've also included a statement of work. So again, how do we identify not just the work of the project, but other aspects that often are translated into our contracts? So those could be things such as place of performance. Are there various security requirements that you may need and require in your contracts? Very often we include milestones around deliveries or objectives that would trigger a payment schedule within the contract. So again, the statement of work is a really good tool and mechanism to capture that information early on. So you are ready to go out, test the vendor community, perhaps with a request for a proposal or RFP or some other tool. You can use the statement of work to build your request for proposal or other tool. You can use your statement of work to build the evaluation criteria that you're going to weigh and measure those proposals on. Other pieces of information that I would consider to be real core and critical in a standard toolkit around contract management for performance, some standard contract outline for you to consider, as well as standard contract language. So again, looking at the terminology, the definition, and the impact of the language. So when we're interpreting contracts, what is the difference between saying, for example, the contractor shall or will do something versus the contractor may do something? So again, really being sure that we have the appropriate contract language developed to meet the needs of that particular initiative. And then two other areas that really come into play when we talk about contract management: issue log. So again, I've created a tool that provides a really robust issue log to manage any of those issues that are coming up, certainly within the contract management, but other aspects of project as well, and a change management mechanism. So again, a tool that allows you to immediately go back and have a mechanism to capture changes that are happening on your project, and to make sure that those changes are translated into addendums or amendments to contracts relative to that project. So we're not missing any steps when we talk about project compliance through a contract lens. So that gives you an overview of the contract management for performance. As I mentioned, there's two other badges that make up the project compliance professional microcredential. Just want to touch point briefly on the other two. The first one is strategic approaches to risk. So when we're looking at this particular badge, again, it can be standalone, or if you choose to use it and stack them for the project compliance professional microcredential, with our strategic approaches to risk, what this really looks at is that all teams, all organizations, all projects face some degree of uncertainty. Projects are unique, so they inherently have their own unique uncertainty or risk. And as we use the proven methodology around risk management in a very sort of systematic framework, we can work to minimize areas where we do have degrees of uncertainty, or where outcomes are harder to predict, or that we're looking to mitigate some of the risk and maybe gain a little bit more control over some of the risk areas or the uncertainty that we've identified. And we also recognize where we can't do that, and how do we build proper contingency planning. We also take a look at system level risk-based analysis, so larger risk considerations, enterprise risk management within organizations. So not just the risk of the project, but risk exposure, risk appetite, risk tolerance for a particular organization. So again, these are some of the areas that we examine within the strategic approaches to risk badge. The final badge in this professional microcredential is successful quality management. And in the successful quality management, what we're really doing here is endeavoring to enhance the working knowledge of key quality concepts and best practices, as well as build some quality basics around analysis, so qualitative and quantitative analysis, and how does that impact our projects, and also to ensure that it reflects quality expectations within our organization. So there are a variety of different quality management techniques, total quality management concepts that we look at. And each of these concepts or approaches has its attributes, but more or less there are major areas that we consider within project management when we talk about planning, building, designing quality into our projects versus just inspecting it in later. And those areas touch on the topics of leadership, involvement of people, client or customer focus. And as you can see, the remainder of the list on the screen, we look at different process system approaches, continuous improvement. We take a really good look at that mutually beneficial supplier relationship, which also is a bit of a dovetail from the contract management for performance badge, as well as fact-based approaches to decision-making. So again, these are the major components that we touch on as we build out the quality management methodology and look at the quality management tools. So again, this would be the third badge that we would see, again, standalone badges or that support the project compliance micro-credential. So as we wrap up this webinar, folks, I want you to know the real objective here is that we recognize individuals that are working within project management. It could be a project off the side of your desk. You might be new to project management, supporting or assisting or coordinating projects, or maybe you do have advanced skill sets in leading and directing projects. Our opportunity here is really to look at that existing knowledge. We don't want to lose sight of it. We maybe organize it and then we expand on it in very specific skill set areas that individuals feel that they have a gap or that they're interested in. So again, regardless of where you are in your own professional practice, your own experience curve with relationship to project management, the way that these badges have been built in the project compliance professional micro-credential have been done so in a way that you can piecemeal and simply take a particular badge to fill a certain skill set or gap that you may have, or you may look at all three of the badges to actually complete the micro-credential itself. So again, I want you to know that we really do look at, yes, the areas of skill set and gap that have sort of been identified in business and industry and sector in Saskatchewan, what we've heard from students, job seekers, employers, those top areas that sort of resonate related to project compliance. And this is how the micro-credential has been built. So again, really want to expand, organize your existing knowledge and expand on it from there. So with that, folks, it brings us to the end of the webinar. Do want to invite you, of course, to stay connected with the university and with the Center for Continuing Education. As you can see, all of our social media feeds are noted here on the screen for you. You are certainly welcome to join our email list and find out more about the project compliance, all of its component badges, and also perhaps even consider some of the other professional micro-credentials that are being offered now and the new ones that we're expecting to come in the winter of 2022.